So, this week Parshas Metzora. So we're going to learn the first Maimer in Parshas Metzora, which is on page 3, and the end of the booklet. The first part of the booklet is Parshas Tazria, and the second part of the book is Parshas Metzora. There's only in Parshas Metzora there's only one Maimer. This Maimer, the Alter Rebbe brings. It's sprinkled throughout with Kabbalah, specifically the Arizal from Eitz Chaim. But what we're trying to discover here is the idea of the Metzora, Tzoras. What is it in a ruchnistic, in a spiritual sense? What is this legion? I mean, as we said before, the whole idea of tzoras is a miraculous phenomenon. So, notwithstanding that, but even within the miraculous part of this phenomenon, you have a more of a rational approach or a physical approach of what's going on, and then you have the Arizal. The insight of the Arizal, and which is what the Alter Rebbe is going to explain, is a much deeper understanding in what's going on. So it's clear that the tzaras, that the legion is coming as a result of a negative behavior, or it's coming as a result of something that is that needs to be changed, a required change. The question is, what is it? What behavior is it addressing that requires to be changed? On the simple understanding, as we said before, the idea of tzaras is because someone spoke lashon hara. He slandered, and because of his behavior, this is the lesson or the indication that is coming as a result of that. And it requires him to change his ways. And it's a whole process of changing your ways. The idea of the purification process is he needs humility. He needs to learn the art of humility. And when you look at the specifics of what he does when he brings his korban and what happens to him, so that's something that he's learning, that Kohen is teaching him. But according to the Kabbalah and Hasidus, so this idea of tzaras is coming from a deficiency in a spiritual sense. What's the deficiency? So, as Alter Rebbe will learn right away in the beginning, the deficiency is he lacks chachma. He has bina, but he lacks chachma. And the Alter Rebbe will explain what is the difference between chachma and bina. And what does it mean that he lacks chachma? And then once we understand what the cause of the tzaras, it's the cause of it is that he lacks chachma. What does he do in order to realign and connect and have chachma? And there's several aspects to that, as we'll learn in the Maimer. But that's the point of where we're going with this. So let's start the Maimer inside. The Metzora was said. The Mevarchem Achedesh year, and it was said in Tavkuf Samachay 1805. I'm sorry, the Metzora was said on the Mevarchem Achedesh Nisan, so it was said in Adar. It was said 29th of Adar, second Adar. The parsha, the second parsha, opens up with this. This is the Torah. This is the instruction of how to administer the purification process of the Metzora. So So it says in Eitz Chaim. Eitz Chaim is from the Arizal Perek Zayin. Shesibas hanegoyim hu machmas istalkus hachachma. When there's a departure, when hachachma is not present, that's when you have the phenomenon of a tzaras, a lesion. Ki Metzora chashuv kimeis. The Gemara says that someone who's a Metzora, and it connects also with the laws of Tumah and Torah, but someone who's a Metzora is considered like a mace, like a dead person. And we see how death, the opposite of life, is connected also with someone who lacks chachma. Uksiv, like it says, yamusu v'lei b'chachma. So where is death present? Death is present when there's an absence, when there's a lack of chachma, when there's no chachma. In the absence of chachma, that's when you have yamusu. In the Kabbalistic teachings, so the idea of death refers to chaos and shattering. Where do you have the shattering of the vessels? That's when chachma is not present. Toyu. When there's a shattering, that's when there's no chachma. But when there's a chachma, yamusu, but belay b'chachma. When there's chachma, so chachma is the opposite of death, of shattering. So by extension, the idea of a Metzora is someone is considered like a mace. Meaning, what does it mean he's like a mace? He's someone who lacks chachma. All right, all of these nice words, but what does it mean? What is chachma? What does it mean he lacks chachma? So lahavin zektzas. So here you have a quote from the Eitz Chaim, from the Arizal. Alter Rebbe is going to explain it a little bit. Lahavin zektzas. Sorech lahavin inin meichen da'aba, meichen de'ema, meichen da'aba. So in order to understand this a little bit, we need to preface by explaining the idea of meichen da'aba, meichen de'ema, meichen da'aba. So you have in meichen, in intellect, the idea of meichen, you have as it's related to bina, ima, and as it's related to abba, chachma. So, what is the idea of meichen de'ima? So the Alter Rebbe explains, Ki hine meichen de'ima hu k'meshakasuv eim abanim smecha. The idea of ima has to do with a mother who is joyous as a result of her banim. Eim abanim, the mother of the children, she's smecha, she's joyous. What does it mean that what does it mean that her children represent the offspring of the mother, which is the emotions that is given way through the bina, through the understanding, through having an understanding, so that gives way to an emotion. By understanding that something's good, that gives way to an emotion of love, and by understanding how something is awesome and overwhelming, that gives way to the emotion of fear. So the eim abanim smecha, it's the mother, the bina is what gives way to those emotions. Sha'ideya is baninus neile da ava v'asimcha v'rishpeish. That through these bananos, that produces the love, the joy, and the fire. The fire is this tremendous, intense, emotional experience. And this is their yearning, the yearning that brings one to want to become enveloped and connected with Hashem. So obviously, we're talking about this in a ruchnistic sense, in a spiritual sense. The idea of bina, as it relates to the emotions, that is true, regardless of whether we're talking about ruchnis or not, spiritual or not. But over here, we're talking about it in a ruchnistic sense. The idea of bina, meichen de'ema, is that which so the meichen in general, the intellect, is an awareness. Gives an awareness of a certain perspective, a certain connection, a certain way of perception, and that perception that dictates a certain level of behavior. The behavior that follows through with the perception of Ema, with the perception of Bina, is recognizing Hashem and how awesome and how great and how removed Hashem is, meaning the Hashem is the all-powerful one, and that brings about a tremendous yearning that one wants to connect with Hashem in a very, very deep way. So that brings about, that's what is called a ratzeh. There's a level which is beyond the level of love, this fire, this yearning, and that's called the moichin, a perception of intellect which is connected with Abba, with Chachma. We know there's a rule that Ein Sof, the infinite light of Hashem, where does it reside? It resides specifically in Chachma. Because why does it reside specifically in Chachma? Is because Chachma is the place where a person is completely batal, is completely surrenders. In a place where there's complete bittul, there's where the Ein Sof, the infinite, can reside. When a person is involved, whatever, even we're talking about very, very subliminal levels here, very high levels, when he has love, and he has an emotion which is active. It's active like fire, but nevertheless, being that it's an emotion, the emotion by definition is connected with one's sense of self, whether it's a higher sense of self or a lower sense of self, meaning to say how much a person feels himself as a Metzias, how much a person feels himself as an entity, that can differ, that can change. But the underlying principle is that the fact that he's being aroused with an intense emotion, so there is a sense of self that carries that emotion. But when we talk about Chachma, so Chachma means a sense of complete surrender, complete bittul. And so in order that there should be able to, where does the Ein Sof, the infinite light of Hashem, where does the divine infinite light of Hashem reside? It resides in a place where there's complete surrender, where there's no sense of self whatsoever. And that's the idea of Chachma. So there's such a sense, such a bittul that he has no this idea of even this sense of self, which is a very subtle, in a subtle way, where he's yearning. There's a sense of self which is yearning to want to be connected with Hashem. Even that sense of self, when in relationship to Chachma, that's absent. Chachma's bittul. Shehu b'chinas yesh misha'oyev. When there's a yearning, which that comes from Bina, that's the yesh misha'oyev. There's a sense of self which loves that, which wants, which is yearning for Hashem. V'zeu means this idea of Chachma, of the bittul of Chachma. That's in Yishtachavosh b'shmoneh esrei. When a person is in davening, that's when a person is in a shmoneh esrei state, where he's silent. He's not allowed to, Hashem sfasai tiftach, Hashem open up my lips. And he's in a state of bowing down to Hashem. That's Chachma. He's in a state of bittul. Like it's explained in many places. The many places explain that we started off to explain the difference between these two levels of moichin, the moichin of Ema, moichin d'Abba. The Tzemach Tzedek gives you a bunch of different Maimarim. Over here, he brings it on number 4, where you can look and see the explanation of the difference between Meichen De'ema and Meichen De'aba. Most recently, we had it in Pesach, the Maimer of Pesach, the first Maimer, Matzah Zu. So there, the Alter Rebbe, the whole idea of matzah and in general, Yom Tif is connected with Meichen De'ema. Shabbos is connected with Chachma. But there he explains the idea of matzah. Matzah is connected specifically with Chachma. The whole idea of matzah is in of bittul. But anyway, so this idea of the difference in bina, Meichen De'ema, Meichen De'chachma. He's prefacing that in order to explain this the phenomenon of tzaras. And that's what it says in Sefer Yetzirah, that if someone yearns, he feels a tremendous, intense yearning to Hashem, so shuv, he needs to return le'echad. What is the returning here is to open up himself to the idea of chachma. The idea of chachma means to be in a state of bittul. So that from there, from Abba, comes the idea of shuv. How does that translate into in Aveda? Is hu amshachas alikus lamata. So that's bringing down Hashem below. When he's in a state of yearning and he feels he's constantly running, he's yearning to Hashem, he's trying to escape his body, escape his confinement. That's what Bina is. He's recognizing that where he is, he's distant, and therefore he's constantly trying to run and to escape the confinement of that's things that are holding him back. And then he reaches a place of Imra, which is the first part of what it says in Sefer Yetzirah. Imratz libcha. Then he reaches a place of Echad. He realizes that everywhere, Hashem is everywhere. Ein od milvado. So that's what allows him to come to recognize that. What gives him that awareness? That's Meichen De'aba. That's Chachma. V'hu amshachas alikus lamata. In order to have that experience, so it's required that he has kelim, he has the vessels for it. What is the kelim? Everything, every light and expression and revelation requires a vessel in which it resides. What is the keli? In which the Chachma resides, that's the Oisis HaTorah, that's the letters. When one learns Torah, Shebiksav HaTorah Shebal, as the Alter Rebbe will say later on in the Maimer, the idea of learning Torah, even if he doesn't remember what he learns, but just the fact that he's learning and he's bringing into himself the letters and the words of the holy words of the Torah, that creates the kelim, that creates the vessel in which the Chachma resides, the Echad, the oneness, the fact that there's nothing else besides Hashem. There it resides there. In that, or through that, he's able to have that experience. So before we get to this piece. So the Eitz Chaim says this is another. This is connected with the previous Eitz Chaim. So the first quote that we said from Eitz Chaim was that the reason why there's a nega, means there's a lesion, is because you lack chachma. You have bina, but you don't have chachma. So in order to explain that, we had to introduce. The Alter Rebbe explained, even though it was short, but he had to explain the difference between Chachma and Bina. Now, he goes further in the idea of what is this nega. So you have Yaakov married 4 wives, right? We know Leah, Rachel, and Bilhah and Zilpah. Here in the Maimer, he doesn't talk about Bilhah and Zilpah. What is Leah and Rachel? How does that in the Kabbalistic understanding of Seder Ishtalshalos and the different levels of godliness, how is that? What is the understanding of Yaakov marrying Leah and Rachel? So Leah represents the level of machshava, of thought, and Rachel represents dibur and maisa. So Yaakov marrying Leah and Rachel is really Yaakov, the idea of chachma, yud ekev, bringing down chachma below into, or even into the machshava and dibur and maisa. Now, obviously, we're talking about it from a human experience. So the Alter Rebbe describes it in Tanya, the difference between the koiches hanefesh, the powers of the soul, and the garments of the soul. The garments of the soul are an expression of the soul, an outer expression of the soul, as opposed to the koiches are an inner expression of the soul. Without getting into that, so the idea here in Ruchnis, the idea of Leah and Rachel is bringing down the Chachma, where the Chachma, the divine, is flowing into Machshava and even into Dibur and Maisa. Now, what happens when there's a disconnect, where the divine is not flowing into the into Leah, into the Machshava, or into Dibur and Maisa? So what happens? That's when a nega happens. That's when you have a lesion. So instead of Leah and instead of Rachel, now you have the two. You have a seis and a beheres. You have two types of tsaras that come as a result, that are indications that there's an absence of chachma. So when there's a fusion, when it's flowing, when the way it's supposed to, so then you have the yichud, the unity of Yaakov and Rachel and Leah. But when there's an absence here, when there's an absence of chachma, so now that's what gives way to tzaras. Let's see it out there inside. V'zeu shekasu beitz chayim shar Leah v'Rachel v'zeu l'shena. Uschor klal zeh. So the Arizal says, remember this rule. She'eina nasa beis partzufim elu Leah v'Rachel kan. Ech ella, when do you have a partzuf? A partzuf is a flow of the divine energy. A partzuf literally means a face or a visage, but it's describing a perfect flow from a higher level to a lower level. So when do you, or we could say it loosely translated like a network. When there's a network, when there's a connection, there's no disconnect. When there's Ela Acher Galus Meichen de Abba Bizah. So when Meichen de Abba flow into Zer Anpin, so then you have the parts of Leah and Rachel. And he explains, Ki Leah hi Eisias HaMachshava. Leah refers to Eisias HaMachshava. So in the levushim, in the garments, the machshava, dibra, maisa, so Leah refers to the letters, the oisius, which the oisius are the carriers of the idea, right? And it carries the idea forward, but it's a oisius of a machshava oisius. Letters in machshava are much different than letters of dibur, right? They're more subliminal, they're more abstract idea of letters. When one speaks, so he hears, when you hear someone speak, so you can hear the enunciation of the letters. And especially when one writes down, so the letters are even more present and more distinct. So in the difference, what makes the distinction here in this idea, in the topic that we're discussing, that makes the distinction between Machshava, Dibur, and Maisa is how distinct the Oisius are. What more present? Is it the Oisius are more present, or is the Ur more present? In Machshava, the Ur is much stronger, is more intense, and the Oisius are more abstract. And that's the idea of Leah, and that refers to Torah Shebiksav. Torah Shebiksav, it says there's 600,000 letters. How do you have 600,000 letters in the Torah? So that refers to Oisius HaMachshava. Because when we talk about the Oisius, it's not the physical letters. but the letters, not only the physical letters, but also the letters that are inferred to when you have Nikudis. So for example, when you have Hey, so there's letters there that you don't even see when you look at the letter. It's the letters which are inferred to through the different Nikudis. As he says, he brings from the Gemara, and you can look on the bottom there. He brings on in note number 7. But anyway, the point is that allows for a lot more letters than just the amount of letters you physically count. But that's all that's connected to machshava. V'rachel yesis adibur. Rachel refers to yesis adibur. Torah shebal peh. Torah shebal peh is a lot more yesis. V'lachein hisav was beis bechinas elu nimshach ha'idei iskalos mechin da'abadaiko. So when do you have, in other words, when do you have that alikus, the godliness should be able to be drawn down into the lower levels, into the level here of machshav and dibur? That's as a result of chachma. Shehu habitul shemizeh nimshach hashuv. Because of chachma, because of the bitul, that's what it brings it down into the world. That's the imrat slib chashuv le'echad. That's all connected with Abba, with Chachma, with Bittul. The idea of Bina, the idea of Bina is the yearning, is the running, is the departure of the Kalim, from the Kalim. To leave, to want to go away from the confinement. So when Abba is not present, when there's no mechin da Abba, there's the lack of bittul. Shezeh inyan tsaras. This is what it means, tsaras. This is this lesion that takes place. What is the idea of tsaras? The Targum is giru. The Targum translates tsaras as giru. What does giru means? It's closed. Closed means it's not. There's no flow there. Mizen is taif. So from there, by extension, she'ein nivne parts of Leah v'Rachel. You can't have the parts of Leah and Rachel. Meaning you can't have the flow of the divine within machshava, within dibur, within maisa into the world when it's closed off. V'yotzim tmuras hanegoyim and v'yotzim tmurasam, and in place of Leah and Rachel you have the negoyim. Se'es neged Leah and Baheres is Rachel. Dahainu mach masheinim shebchinas shuv bekelim v'ayis dikdusha. Azai mebchinas haratzi levad yuchal leistoif inikas achitzainim. So now the Alter Rebbe explains this idea a little further. That this idea that when you don't have, when there's no chachma, when you're not bringing down the divine into the world, into the kelim, so that can bring about a nega, meaning it can bring about something negative. And he brings a mashal of davening. When someone davens, so he davens and he's in a state of hispilus, in a state of excitement, and he feels he has a very intense emotional experience. So after davening, it can lead to negative things. In other words, when the cause of the inspiration goes away, and what he's left with is the inspiration itself, is the emotional experience itself, that's something that can bring to feelings of pleasure, but now that the cause that brought about these emotions go away because he's not davening anymore, so that now can bring to these feelings, but in a worldly, mundane manner. just to give a mashal to this idea. So you have when you serve Hashem, so we could use in the Beis Hamikdash. They used instruments. They used instruments to serve. All of that was part. There was a whole the experience that was going on in the Beis Hamikdash was a tremendous, awesome experience. And as part of that experience, you had all the Levim, you had orchestras playing music, and it was all in the spirit of having that experience, bringing down into a full flavor experience. But all of that was there to fill in, to complete that whole experience. But if you take an instrument by itself and just play the music, so the music itself, when it's not expressing all that, everything else that's happening at the same time, so that the music itself could sometimes bring about a very, very negative thing. When the music is there as part of the full experience that's taking place, so now it's an extension of that. But when that experience is no longer there, and you only are left with a tune or with an instrument, without that, so that sometimes can bring about a very negative effect. In other words, in order to, some things they can go either way. But when the thrust, the experience, the feeling that's there is a godly one, so then by extension it also extends through and extends with everything else that's taking place. But when you take that away and the only thing you're left with is that instrument or that tune, so then it can feel very separate and very distant from that. In the same way, there's only a mashal. The same way when someone's davening, so davening, we're using it here. He's having this experience, but he's mainly the way it's manifesting itself is he has a very, very strong yearning to Hashem. But if it remains only strong yearning to Hashem, so when he comes after davening and he comes back to the world, he comes back to himself, comes back to his existence and his worldly space, so now it's void. Because he can't maintain that unless he brings down only what allows that there also in his space he's able to feel and experience the godliness is only when he has with it the idea of chachma. When he has bittul, so bittul, the chachma brings out that even in that space he's able to have that experience. But if he doesn't, if that's missing, then he's separate. In other words, so long as he's in and you see this, there's many different ways and analogies. I mean, there are also different levels. You have many people, when they're in the shul, when they're in the study of Torah, when they're in that space, so then they have a very, very divine and deep experience. But as soon as they leave that area, so all of a sudden, sometimes not only is it that they don't have that experience, but that whole thrust and intensity can be used in a negative way. The only way to continue that he should be able to have that experience and it shouldn't lead him into a negative space is he requires the component of chachma. He requires that bittul. If he has bittul, then it continues, it extends even beyond just the experience itself, just the davening itself. And that's what the Alter Rebbe says. different things can come as a result of that. So just to conclude, that's the inyan of a nega, the tzaras. What is it? It's the absence of chachma, the absence of bittul. Okay.
Absence of Leah.
That instead of Leah and Rachel, you have the seis and the baharis.
So machshava, Leah machshava is representing bittul, and
Leah is the likus nimshach into the oisius, either into oisius or machshava.
Rachel is representing bittul.
Both
It's going to dibur.
The bittul allows that the likus should be nimshach into Leah and Rachel. Leah and Rachel is the manifestation, is bringing down the likus into Welt, right, into the world. If there's only a inyan of bina, so then it's not nimshach into Welt, because that's fakir. That's the inyan of aris came from Welt. That's the inyan of ratzeh, right? But when you have bittul, when you have moichen de abba, which is bittul, that allows that the likus should be nimshach into Welt. Into both, into machshava and into dibra ma'aseh.